About 30 years ago, people who had been hospitalized for mental illness began to organize a self-help movement. The goal of this movement was to put an end to the economic and social discrimination facing people with psychiatric histories. As the movement grew, its members found that they could support each other in their struggle to improve their own lives and the lives of others who had been branded by the stigma of mental illness. By banding together, first in small self-help groups and then in local, statewide, and national organizations, they were able to make their voices heard. Today, people who in the past might be warehoused in institutions are providing services to their peers. They are influencing mental health policy. They are joining forces with others who support their goals. They are changing their own lives and changing history. But, as they would be the first to tell you, they still have a long way to go before they are truly accepted as full citizens in this society. This documentary will tell the story of how the self-help movement in one state, Pennsylvania, is making a difference in the lives of people with mental illnesses.
The self-help empowerment movement is an outgrowth of a history of long-term institutionalization and centuries of being locked away, out of sight, out of mind. In the past, people with mental illnesses were society's outcasts, society's throwaway population. It wasn't until the 1960s and 1970s that the voices of empowerment quietly began to surface and be heard.
I learned how to use this, okay? Use something is damaged, was supposed to be damaged, okay? I never had the right to say anything, but now I do.
The voices that were heard spawned an anti-psychiatry movement, or as it was also known, the patients' rights movement. This evolved into what later became known as the consumer survivor ex-patient movement.
Well, everywhere in the system and in academia where professionals are being trained, people are being told things about people who are psychiatrically labeled without our voices being heard, without ever respecting and hearing what we have to say about our own experience, and this has to change.
No longer do I want to just sit in a corner and be medicated, not heard from, patting the head like a dog or something. I want to be out there, voicing my opinions, my rights, and my views. This is the only way that we can do it, is empowerment.
We all have stories. We've all been someplace. We've all been stepped on. We all deal with whatever problem we have, whatever diagnosis, whatever label, every day of our lives. And nobody can make us forget what we went through to get here, to become empowered.
The movement began when people started fighting that notion that we're powerless, that we can't speak for ourselves, that we can't do for ourselves. My understanding of the movement prior to my involvement in the consumer survivor movement is that people who had been psychiatrically hospitalized, people who had had very negative experiences in the psychiatric system, started finding each other in various pockets of our country and communicating by phone or letter. And eventually people started to get together in conferences that were held on campgrounds, and people would hitchhike to have an opportunity to come together with people from all over the country. These were basically gatherings of people who had been psychiatrically oppressed, who weren't funded through scholarships or government funds, who, with their own resources, got together trying to make an impact and a difference, trying to influence and improve the psychiatric system and trying to help people get out of the psychiatric system.
In the past, the public perception of people who were in the mental health system was that they weren't supposed to function and survive and recover, It's a stereotype and a myth that society has held for many generations. What the movement promotes is the opportunity for consumers to hear the message of empowerment and to start in their own way to accept the challenge of speaking for themselves and to become empowered. In the process of becoming empowered, they will become directly involved in their own treatment, recovery, and future.
Recovery for me means that I can come here and meet you, and I can talk to you, and that's important to me. It means that I can laugh. It means that I can cry sometimes without feeling like that's not a good thing because, you know, there she goes crying again. That's part of my illness. No, that's part of my recovery. Recovery to me means that I make a difference. Recovery to you has to mean that you know you make a difference in life. That's what it's about.
As the voices of empowerment multiplied throughout the state of Pennsylvania, the movement grew. And as it grew, strong leaders emerged, leaders that evolved from years of hard advocacy work that have supported the movement's philosophy and values, that have supported the concept of empowerment. These self-help advocates had a strong need to speak out. They wanted to be heard and to fight for their individual rights as human beings.
I think that the mental health consumers movement is the last civil rights movement, is the way I look at it. I think that people with mental illness have been discriminated against for years, denied their rights, denied opportunities, and I think that this is the last stand of the civil rights movement, the last stand of giving people back their rights. When you put someone in an institutional environment, you strip them of all rights and also most responsibilities, and the two are, you can't have responsibility without rights or rights without responsibility, and it's time that we give both back.
Monday, is a day of reflection and honor of Martin Luther King, who was a leader of the fight for civil rights. And our movement, the Consumer Survivor Empowerment Movement, is much like that same movement, as we're fighting for our rights, and we're actually fighting for our lives. We're fighting to survive. We're fighting to gain the rightful place in society that each and every one of us in this room deserves. We're all individuals who have strengths. We're all people of power. We're all people with voices. We can, in fact, speak for ourselves rather than being spoken for by other people. We can make decisions about our lives. We can learn and grow from each other. And through that movement, we're also educating society as to who we are and what we represent.
Some people will never accept that we're first-class citizens or equal to others, but collectively, we can't be concerned as to what degree of citizenship someone else feels we have. I think it's more contained within ourselves, what we feel. And I always say to the groups that I talk to that I may have a condition, but I'm not the condition, and I refuse to let anyone equate my illness with my intelligence.
What I think first we have to do is stand up and say that we do have rights, that we are citizens of this country, that we can vote, that we can organize, we can make our voices heard, that we can come together and actually begin to solve some of our own problems through self-help and mutual support, that we don't have to be dependent totally on others or professionals to find the solutions. And that's one of the things we need to do, what we have to do is organize. I mean, it's as simple as that and as complex as that, is that you've got to find a way to get other people interested and involved and bring them together, sometimes for self-help and sometimes to picket, to demonstrate, to stand up and speak out when you see an injustice being done.
On May 11th, 1985, Joseph Rogers, the founder of the consumer empowerment movement in Pennsylvania, and 4 self-help advocates from Project SHARE a consumer organizing project, chained themselves to the gates of the Philadelphia Housing Authority office to protest proposed housing policies that would discriminate against people with mental illnesses.
We changed ourselves to the Public Housing Authority because they had recently, at that time, put out rules that would have required mental patients or mental health consumers to get special clearance before they could rent from the Public Housing Authority, before they could get housing at the Public Housing Authority. And at the time, we were very new in Pennsylvania. The organizing effort for organizing self-help and advocacy for mental health consumers was really just getting started. And it seemed like a very good target. I mean, it was a real blatant case of discrimination, and we needed to sort of get some people paying attention to what we were doing and what we wanted to accomplish, get the word out. And so, doing a very public, out there kind of demonstration was called for, we felt, in a way to get our voices heard.
Soon after the demonstration, the Philadelphia Housing Authority amended its discriminatory rules. The empowerment movement had won a major victory. This event unified the voices of empowerment and expanded the self-help movement from purely anti-psychiatry into a movement that could influence mental health reform and in the process improve the mental health system. The new advocacy regime had arrived and was paving the way for alternative treatment models and a heightened recognition of the movement's goals and ideology. As the people in the movement matured, the Pennsylvania consumer empowerment movement grew and asserted itself through the unified efforts of several organizations.
To make real changes, there needed to be a well-organized set of activities, that you couldn't do it all on a volunteer basis, that people, especially when they're struggling with a serious disability, it's tough for them to put the extra energy of going out and getting a job where they can make a living, and then put in the energy of trying to do advocacy. So we needed to have paid advocacy organizing efforts, and the ICANN, Involved Consumer Action Network, and Project Share are the way to get some staff, to get individuals who are consumers some resources to get paid so that they can do the full-time organizing that it really takes to make a change.
Project Share started here in the Delaware Valley in Philadelphia and the 4 surrounding counties, and from that has grown another project. ICANN in Pennsylvania is a project of the Mental Health Association of Southeastern Pennsylvania. We're funded by the state to provide technical assistance to groups throughout the state. We also provided technical assistance to the Pennsylvania Mental Health Consumers Association. We support them in helping to fund their board meetings and also providing technical assistance and putting on their statewide consumer conference. And together we do things to help one another, and we do things jointly, all of us working together.
When I was working with Project Share in Delaware County and eventually directing Project Share in southeastern Pennsylvania, I received a lot of phone calls from other parts of the state to come out and speak, to share the message of the consumer empowerment movement about self-help, and to promote the development of self-help groups in other parts of the state. And I started talking with people in Harrisburg in the Office of Mental Health, and mentioned the idea that wouldn't it be great if we had a project funded to be able to go out and reach across the state to rural areas, suburban areas, urban areas, and be able to share the message of the movement. And as a result of that, we received funding for what became ICANN in Pennsylvania, which is the Involved Consumer Action Network, a statewide technical assistance project. At the same time, leadership was emerging from various parts of the state as people were becoming a part of the consumer survivor movement. And simultaneously, we created what's called the Pennsylvania Mental Health Consumers Association. And that's an organization of people who have survived the mental health system, people who describe themselves as consumers of mental health services. And wanted to come together and to network and learn from each other and develop an advocacy presence statewide to be able to fight for better mental health services in the state of Pennsylvania.
PMHCA provides a unified, representative voice of consumers in the state. It's a place where every consumer can look to and say, we're important. We're important, and we're important enough to have a statewide organization who is impacting on the legislative level and at the statewide bureaucratic level. We're important enough to have individuals who are out there really fighting for our dignity and for the fact that there need to be more alternatives.
It's what the consumers want, how the consumers want it, what the consumers want to do, and I think it should be all consumers. I'm a consumer.
With a united voice, we can make some rather drastic changes in treatment plans that are going to definitely benefit people in the long run down the line. We can do policy issues as far as funding sources, either federal government or state government. But it all hinges on that united voice again, and I think that's basically what the consumer empowerment movement is. It's a united voice. But at the same time, you have individual advocacy for people taking charge of their own lives, their own treatment plans, and looking at that smaller picture, but then all of those small pictures put together is the movement itself.
I believe the entire behavioral health care system, the mental health system, has changed as a result of people who are directly using services, stepping forth and becoming a part of the process of developing policy, of developing programs, of creating services run by ourselves and for ourselves. It has dramatically changed what I saw 15 years ago, in which people did for other people. Now we are doing for ourselves and other people, and helping train new people coming through the empowerment movement to be a part of that process, so that it's a system of more independence rather than dependence. It's an opportunity for people to move out of the system rather than be stuck in the system.
As a political entity, the mental health consumers empowerment movement has played a key role in the downsizing and closing of several state hospitals in Pennsylvania. What has resulted is the development of community-based programs and natural supports so that people who do re-enter the public community have an opportunity to succeed in their recovery. One of the first hospitals to crumble from the pressure of the movement was Philadelphia State Hospital, also infamously known as Byberry.
After about 20 years of being out of the mainstream workforce and being marginally employed or unemployed, I decided that the kind of work that I wanted to do was to work in the mental health system, because I thought that there would be the opportunity to basically support people as I had done as part of the peer counseling community. And the first place I worked was Philadelphia State Hospital. And I hired someone to work with me who had worked in the system before and been a therapist, and after a very short time I said to him, I can't tell the difference between what are these people's basic difficulties and what's the effect of the psychiatric drugs. And then, after a few days more, the light dawned that most of the difficulties that I saw in terms of these people having very zombie-like appearances and blunted intelligence, as well as physical, visible physical effects such as tardive dyskinesia and tardive dystonia, that these people were really being destroyed by psychiatric treatment, and that they were not respected as human beings, and that no one who worked with them knew or remembered what these people were like when they first came to the system.
The closure of mental institutions today, to me, is phenomenal. Who the hell wants to be in a godforsaken place for 10, 15, 20 years? Your humanness is taken away from you. And Byberry was a horrible place, a horrible place. I guess there must have been about 7,000 or 8,000 beds And their idea of a bath was to strip everybody down and to put them in metal chairs, men, women, all thrown together, and turn the fire hose on. That's a bath. If for no other reason, it's enough to close that damn place.
I believe that closing of Mayview State Hospital, its proper name is Philadelphia State Hospital. And this happened probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And it was important because when it was announced that it would be closed, the Commonwealth wanted to take those funds and put it back into the general fund of the state. And there was a coalition that was formed of consumers, family members, and professionals, which sought to make sure that the people who would be discharged from Philadelphia State Hospital or those that would be moved to Norristown State Hospital, that there would be appropriate funds to be available for community-based services. And this coalition filed a lawsuit against the Commonwealth, and they were successful in winning this lawsuit. So initially there was like $50 million that would have gone back into the general fund of the Commonwealth, was used for community-based services. And this was a real victory for consumers, families, and providers, basically the whole CSP concept of everyone working together to improve the mental health system.
A lot of times you close hospitals and just sort of dump people. We've not allowed them to do that. We've closed hospitals and created funding or seen funding transferred from the institutions to community programming. And that's happened in significant parts of the state, and probably we're in a good position to see that the impact of that increase over the next few years. So having a strong voice of consumers demanding community care, demanding community placements, housing, jobs. I think we've also made the mental health system more relevant to the needs of the individual. I think in the past the system tended to be much more of a sort of medical model, clinically oriented system, would treat your symptoms, but really didn't deal with you as a whole person. So now we see much more interest in the mental health system to provide vocational programming, socialization, things like the Compeer Community Companion Program. I think these all have grown out of the consumer movement. Plus, I think we've created a vital system component, part of the continuum of care, with the consumer-run programming, such as the drop-in centers. I mean, those. I think it's almost underestimated how important those are to people and to individuals, and what an important role that can play, because it's a place for people to really relate to each other and relate to a community and deal with one of the worst problems I find in mental illness, which is that sense of isolation and being alone with this, struggling with this thing called mental illness.
The federal government did studies on major cities that didn't have drop-in centers versus that had drop-in centers. One of the things that they found out that their admittance to the units in the hospitals in those cities dropped 40% if that town had a viable drop-in center. Their crisis hotline, their suicide hotline numbers, they dropped 60% if you had a drop-in center in those communities.
For me, I feel it saved my life, and the drop-in center is very important to me. I suffer from severe depression for over 25 years, and I had a especially depressing bout. I came out of the hospital and I had no support system at all. I was in the midst of a divorce. I had lost my business. I had lost my daughter, wouldn't even talk to me. I had no one. And I learned about the drop-in center. And instead of sitting home alone on a weekend in an 8th floor apartment and being down and depressed and thinking about my problems, I had someplace to go. I didn't know the people there, but I could go there and be comfortable and at ease and just relax and be with people that understood what I was going through. And I didn't have to be alone, and it made all the difference in the world for me, maybe even in jumping off that 8th floor balcony.
Drop-in centers are an excellent place to come and battle the one thing that I think is the greatest hurdle, I think, is loneliness among persons with mental illness. Sometimes your social skills have deteriorated, your connections to people have deteriorated to the point that they really need to be jump-started, and that's kind of a safe place you can come and practice those things. and get comfortable with that again. I mean, just being around a group of people again or being in crowds or going out into the public. I found in my own illness, simply sitting at the back of the church was very, very stressful. The number of people, the noise, the thoughts that you have. So I think that drop-in centers are a very good vehicle to reconnect people to society.
Though the self-help movement is driven by people who have shared similar feelings and similar experiences within the mental health system, the meaning of empowerment is a distinctly personal issue for each individual concerned.
And since I got hooked up with this movement, I'll tell you what, I'm getting my life back. And I can't explain it in words what it feels like to get up in the morning now and know that I have phone numbers of people that really care about me, not about what I'm going to perform or how much I'm getting or anything like that. And when I call and I say, you know what, I'm having a bad day, I'm not going to be able to make it, they don't give me a bunch of crap. They say, you take care of yourself. But they're encouraging me. My skills are coming back fine-tuned. You know, I was a very good worker as a site manager, and you don't get there by not doing anything. You know, you have to have a lot of skills.
The hardest thing for me was becoming self-empowered. To learn that somewhere inside me there was a lot of self-esteem, okay, because I had always been shot down by the system, by family, and by whatever. It just all closed in on me. And learning to deal with that is the way I became empowered.
I'm a bipolar manic depressive. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know what kind of medication was out there, what kind of treatment plans. And I basically took the bull by the horns, became empowered, started learning about my illnesses and what was out there to cure it, and just took charge of my own treatment plan.
Empowerment is being able to do things on my own without having to be dependent upon other people to give me assistance. I mean, it used to be, I guess, as a mental health consumer, you get so dependent upon the whole system, whether it be a counselor or a social worker or even, you know, you're, like when you're in the hospital, your meals are provided for you and things like that. You get so dependent upon everything and everybody. And when you come out, you have to learn the process, I think, of empowerment over again and learn to make, first, things like cooking for yourself and then moving on to taking care of your house and then getting a job and going on from there. So it's a long step back from being able to do nothing for yourself to having to do everything, but it can be done. And I think the empowerment or the consumer movement has helped many consumers be able to do that and find that there's life at the end of that tunnel and a full life.
Empowerment to me is holding down a job, getting a paycheck, having decent health benefits, and being able to have a salary high enough to compensate for the discriminatory healthcare system that we have presently. If I returned to work at the minimum wage, I'd be hard-pressed with insurance to even pay for the medications which I'm currently taking.
Empowerment for many people means choice, and what choices are made depends not only upon what choices are made available to them through the mental health system, but on each person's ability to recognize his or her own specific individual needs.
I personally consider myself a radical in the sense that I want a system of care radically changed from the way it's organized right now. I want a system of care that when you have a mental illness, you're treated as an individual. I think that's pretty radical still in our system. That when a professional deals with you, they deal with you as a consumer of their services, someone who has the ability, hopefully, to make choices. That's one of the biggest things we're fighting for. And I think there's a lot of unity around that, that when you want to have the choice whether or not you get services, and you want choices within the service options, or as many service options as possible that you can get. So I think there's a a kind of a unity around that we want to see people have choice.
One of the most controversial and frequently debated issues among self-help advocates is the choice of whether or not psychiatric medications are beneficial or harmful to the user.
I've used psychiatric drugs as prescribed for years and years and years. And if I hadn't used them, if I wasn't using them now, I'd still be in the institutions.
When I first was offered a choice of medications with schizophrenia in 1988, they put a list of 11 medicines in front of me and they gave me a choice. I think that we not only need a choice of medicines, that choice made me take the medicine and help me get better, but if they didn't give me that choice, I might not have ever taken the medicine and I might be dead or homeless right now. But we need more choices than that. We need choices in housing, we need choices of therapists, we need choices of all kinds of treatment.
And we're still working to create the alternatives that are most desperately needed. And by that, I mean alternatives offering intensive emotional support to people in crisis, intensive emotional support as an alternative to the standard psychiatric treatment. And there have been many cases of examples of residential facilities that have offered intensive emotional support. And when people go to those places, they actually get what they need and heal and never need to come back to the psychiatric system again. And unfortunately, this information is excluded both from the education of professionals, and it's also excluded from the media and academia.
I hooked up with a good doctor, and I think that is one of the best things that a person with mental illness can do. If you can hook up with a doctor that you trust, and more importantly, a doctor that listens to you. And this is a lady doctor. She's fantastic. And I told her from day one that I was never one for medication. I didn't even take aspirins all my life. I was never liked aspirins or any kind of over-counter medication, yet alone psychotropic medication. And she understood that. And I can remember when I started feeling really good, I decided that I wanted to try Prozac again, because I had been on Prozac and I had felt fine, except that it really escalated my insomnia, because it's one of the few psychotropic drugs that isn't a downer, it's an upper. So that was the last thing that somebody with, insomnia should be taking, but that was prescribed by my family doctor, who wasn't, a psychiatrist. So anyway, I went back to her and I said to her that, I wanted to go back on Prozac because I think I wanted that feeling, that good feeling again. And I said, I don't think it's going to affect the side effects with the insomnia because I think I have that under control. And she said to me at that time, well, wait a minute. She says, there's a new drug out there on the market right now. It's kind of experimental. Yeah, this is a couple years ago. Anafranil. She said, let's try that. So I tried that for about 4 or 5 months, and it worked really great. It didn't affect my sleeping. It had my mood swings under control. It was fantastic. The only trouble is after those couple months, it just started, like I got immune to it. And then I started panicking, like, oh man, where am I going to go? I should go back to this again. Well, in the meantime, they came out with a new one, Paxil. So I started taking Paxil with her recommendations and my own studies as to what this was, what this medication was, what it was supposed to do for me. And it worked marvelous with me. I mean, for me, it was the perfect medication. And then I got to the point I started feeling so good, I said to myself, I wonder what would happen if I didn't take the medication. And I thought, I know better than to just do it on my own and everything. So I went to her. And this is where I keep saying that it's so important to have a doctor to listen to you. I went to her and I said, look, I'm feeling pretty good, the best I've been in the last couple of years. But would I be feeling this good without the medication? And she looked at me and she said, well, why don't we try? And I mean, I almost fell off the chair. I couldn't believe that a doctor was going to be willing to, take you off medication. And she basically said, well, you've done so much research. And she said, the little oddities, like for myself, I know when I'm starting to get depressed, I crave chocolate. So if I start craving chocolate, I know that I'm going to be depressed in the next 2 or 3 days, that I'm going down into one of my manic moods or my depressed moods. So then she said, these early warning signs. And she said, if you need it, take it. Because it has a real quick kick-in factor. It kicks in a period of like 2 days. And she said, if you want to try going without it, try it. And this is basically what we did for about 9 months. Totally weaned me off any medication so far, or up to that point. And for the last 2 years now, I've taken no medication, and all I do is what they call cognitive therapy, which is kind of brainwashing yourself into the right way of thinking.
I believe in the psychiatrists do play a role and have helped people, and I know I myself have been helped very much through mental health professionals, and I see a need. When I need services available, I will seek them out. But I think a lot has to depends upon one's own experience in the mental health system. There have been many people who have been misdiagnosed in the past, and some people who've felt as if maybe they did not have a mental illness, but whatever happened to them, somehow they got into the system, and they have real strong feelings about that. But the vast majority of the people, I think, have been helped by the system.
I think what's wrong with the mental health system now is that there's still not enough listening to consumers and what consumers have to say. I think that a lot of money is wasted by providers and mental health agencies who are well-meaning, who say this is what you need, and consumers saying, no, that's not what I need is, and there's not the communication between the two. And I think that the mental health system will start to improve when it actually genuinely listens to the voice of the consumer and gives the consumer what the consumer needs for that person's idea of wellness.
I think the problem is that we're dealing with a personal problem, personal difficulties that have become a business, and that takes away that personal touch. Someone has problems. Someone is, has mental problems. Someone has emotional problems. Someone's been raped by their dad and beat up by their mom and shot by their brother. 2 pills and a comeback in a month is not going to do it. It takes a lot to heal someone. It takes patience. It takes time. It takes a dwelling into that person on a very personal level. And when you mix business what do you call it, the factory line, the assembly line type of thing with people, it's going to fail. And that's what it's doing. People are labeled, medicated, stored away. There are those who care, but they're the Davids versus the Goliaths. And they don't even have the slingshot right now.
If we aren't learning from that, if we aren't learning that the successes are seen when we reach out as human beings, you can give somebody a pill if you don't provide them with the human element and bring them into their community and give them a good place to live and provide them with a community, a pill isn't going to work.
Though the empowerment movement has made great strides in creating change and support within the mental health system, the stigma associated with mental illness continues to be a barrier for people attempting to reclaim their lives within the constructs of normal society. They must not only face the stigma imposed on them by the general public, but also the indifferent treatment by law enforcement officers and insensitive government officials who are neither prepared nor willing to accept the idea that people with mental illnesses can live independently outside the walls of an institution.
2 weeks ago, I called the police because somebody was looking in my window. My neighbor was looking in my window at 11:30 at night. So I called the police because he was being a peeping Tom. But the officer proceeded to tell him not to worry about it because, quote, they know that I have a mental illness and I take medication. So they told him that. Now, to me, what's the problem with that? Okay, first of all, he was looking in my window, which is against the law. I was minding my own business, laying in bed. You know, because I have a mental illness means that automatically he can just get off scot-free. No charges were filed.
It's kind of an interesting phenomenon in a country that has a constitution and the concept that citizens have rights. There seems to be almost a lack of understanding that once you have a diagnosis, a mental illness diagnosis, or you're a mental patient, that you still have rights. I think in society at large, it's almost like we're somehow prisoners, that we've committed a crime And in fact, in some people's minds, prisoners have more rights than mental patients.
One self-help advocate who is tearing down the walls of stigma is Michael H. Mundus, a singer-composer who brings his impassioned message of hope and empowerment to people throughout the mental health system. Michael, who calls himself the troubadour of the madhouse, has brought the message of empowerment to every state hospital in Pennsylvania.
By your love I've come to know my dream, empowered by the means of your love, your love. By your love I've come to know my dream, empowered by the means of your love.
Mental illness is a contagious disease. The carrier is ignorance. What we don't know about it helps it spread through our society. So what we need to do is be inflamed with hope and educate one another. The information age causes incredible onslaught of newness. So we have to learn from each other, and we have to work within the system, whatever system we're in. So my message is simple: to sow hope to the individuals that are in the back wards, and hope that the chronically normal people on the outside can, in some way, realize that these people have an identity, they have significant role in our society.
I mean, do we sometimes feel stigmatized? Well, we can take that internally, or we can say we won't buy that. But to tell someone that you have a mental illness, sometimes you watch them take that step backwards, and you think, oh, where are they coming from? And you know that it's someplace judgmental, it's someplace critical. And yet when people tell us things, we don't take that step backward. We reach out and say, it's okay. There's the difference. That's the difference between mental illness and normal.
If you think we're crazy, people who have been labeled by psychiatry, then what about the people who are building the weapons of mass destruction? What about the people who are polluting the earth for profit? What about the people who are exploiting other human beings for profit? And my view of what's happening in this society, and our issues are political issues. They're issues that absolutely exist in context. We are individuals who exist in the context of a society, and yet the label mental illness judges us and our behavior as being the problem. We exist in the context of a society where it is harder and harder to get basic human needs met, including the need for community and basic love and caring.
But here, on this planet, in this country, in this state of Pennsylvania, we draw the line right at your eyebrows. And we tell you that if you have a physical illness that affects your brain, we will perceive you as differently, we will treat you differently, we will contribute every other thing wrong with you to that mental illness. We isolate, we segregate, we insure less, we pay for less, we have attitudes out the wazoo, no support, we're isolated. And this is the way our society responds to individuals with mental illness. And it's absolutely insane.
I told my father, he lives in Philadelphia, the outskirts of Philadelphia, Chestnut Hill, with my mother. And we were sitting around a kitchen table, and I explained to him how I was going to be involved in this making of this film. And when he said, well, what's the film about? And I told him mental illness. I told him that I was going to start the film out by saying his name and his address, and he said, don't do that, I'll have to leave Pennsylvania. So there is a stigma there, and sometimes it begins right at home. And sometimes, most of the time, it begins with loved ones. And it's up to us to enlighten them exactly to what our disease is, and that Just because we have a disease doesn't make us a bad person.
Sometimes people think that people with mental illness should just stay with other people with mental illness. But, you know, that's not necessary. People with a mental illness are people, just like other people, with interests and talents and skills, and they can integrate into the community in a lot of different ways, and be in clubs and do social functions and get married, have children.
We want to believe that our society is ready to accept that, you know, mental illness is a disease, that we're normal people. But the media is still much stronger than our voice. The power of the media is still way stronger than our voice. So the fact is that the general public still sees the depiction of the mentally ill as individuals at the top of a water tower with a gun, or somebody who is out there on the streets, you know, and in a dangerous state. That's still the perception that I think most of our society has.
When you see TV and movies, they make blatant errors in talking about diagnoses and what this person's illness might be that's causing him to do this horrible thing to society. That is just really part of our popular culture. And also in the news, when something is reported, the person may have had a history of depression 30 years ago, and they'll invariably say, oh, by the way, he had a history of mental illness. It's amazing that even in people's obituaries on the news, they'll say, and as you remember, he had a history of mental illness. Like that's the only thing they did in their entire life.
Despite society's reluctance to accept people with psychiatric histories as full and deserving citizens, the empowerment movement continues to grow and spread its message of hope and recovery, not just in the state of Pennsylvania, but throughout the United States and around the globe. As the future dawns on a new millennium, the visionaries of the self-help empowerment movement have organized and have learned to speak for themselves. They have gained insight into themselves as people, not diagnoses. And in the process, they have recovered their lives, their goals, and their dreams.
Like any new discipline, the people that enter that new discipline, they're the pioneers, and they also defy society in a way, you know, and say, you're trying to do this way, and we're going to try to do it this way. You know, astronomy grew that way, mathematics grew that way. Traveling across oceans, people left countries to go to another country, hoping there will be something better. We're trying to create something better. And we have our battles. And it's really not our battles. That's the funny thing about it. It's not our battle. It's the prospective viewer's battle. They have to get over the fact that we are some label.
For me, it's kind of fascinating as a community organizer and having been in on the sort of the beginning and the ground floor to see how large we are as a movement, at least how spread out we are. I mean, there's groups on the internet. I get pretty regular communications with groups from Australia all the way to Slovenia. We had a television conference with a group from Slovenia, and there were people from Hungary and Czechoslovakia, and I know there's groups in Moscow, and so it's I think a kind of a really, I don't know how important it is. I'm not enough of a sociologist to tell, but I think it's exciting that people who only a few 10 or 15 years ago were considered the only place you could sort of find us was in institutions, and now you find us organizing our own self-help and advocacy movements in almost every capital of the world. I think that's quite a statement. I think and I think ultimately will change the public's attitude, and with changing the public attitude, change things like funding availability, that this works, that self-help and mutual support, and that there is a possibility of recovery. I mean, it's a message of hope that we're out there and we're organizing, and doing our own thing and creating our own alternatives and advocating for ourselves is a message of hope that mental illness doesn't have to be the death sentence it used to be.
No, mental illness is not the death sentence it used to be. There is hope for recovery. And now is the time to speak out, to celebrate who we are, to celebrate life. I've been asked to speak to you as we celebrate Mental Illness Awareness Week. And some of you know that I don't hold my tongue when you ask me to speak from my heart. And some of you may know that before I speak from my heart, I ask God for the words. I pray in my car a lot on my way to meetings. I happen to know my limitations, but I know our strengths. And so I prayed before I came here tonight. I prayed because I know that some of you think that illness as a word is the focus. Oh, it's Mental Illness Awareness Week, after all. And some of you think that the world will treat us better if they knew that we have diseases. And I pray and I ask, is that true? No, it's not true. Some people think we can never get better, and we should be off the street and out of normal people's hair. And I pray and ask, God, is that true? No, it's not true. And I look around at my friends who suffer not only from symptoms of mood and thought disorders, but from the shame and the guilt handed to us by a society that wishes we would go away. And I pray and I ask, God, does this have to happen? Is it our fault that we don't have a valid or worthy place in this society? No, it's not your fault. But it's still your responsibility to make a change. It's up to you to open the eyes of the blind. It's up to you to educate the ignorant. It's up to you to silence the wrong ones and to empower the innocent. Ouch, God. Well, I never said it would be easy. I just said it's got to be done. And so I pray each day as I go about the work I do. And if my prayers are answered, a former state hospital resident in my neighborhood will be referred to as this really neat guy that lives down the street. And if my prayers are answered, our families will back off and allow us to speak for ourselves when we're able to, and they'll have a better idea of when that time is. And if my prayers are answered, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, will be applied across the board by providers, family, government leaders, and fellow consumers. And if my prayers are answered, communities will no longer look for ways to hide us because mental illness will be understood. And if my prayers are answered, we will be known by our names, not our diagnoses. And if my prayers are answered, people with mental illnesses will not be used as entertainment or media sales bait because the viewing or the reading public will not stand for it. And if my prayers are answered, hospitals will be for short stays when we need them and not for a place to live and call home. And if my prayers are answered, yes, and research will be done, however, not for the profit-making sales of drug companies, but for the benefit of consumers who suffer from symptoms and for their families who fight to keep them safe in an unkind world. As the president of the Pennsylvania Mental Health Consumers Association, I invite all of the consumers in this room to join me as we make these changes happen right here in our own state, county, city, township, and neighborhood. We cannot let our voices be silent anymore.